Sarah Bond, president of Xbox at Microsoft.
Earlier this week, Xbox announced the shuttering of 4 game studios. How should gamers understand that move in terms of Microsoft's commitment to developing innovative exclusive games?
Yeah, but our focus just really continues to be on, but keeping the developer at the center.
Scusi, con me? We've seen it a lot this year. Too many times, really. Entire gaming studios getting shut down. Whole teams of talented developers being unceremoniously sent home. You will think because their games bombed, and in some cases that might be true, but Tango Gameworks and their Hi-Fi Rush proved that that's not always the reason. Moreover, guess what? Nobody really wants to develop a bad game. Arcane didn't want Redfall to be bad. Usually, if this happens, it's because of limitations set by the higher-ups, the management. I mean, we all need limitations, that's for sure. But when limitations and expectations are unreasonable, that's when the boat sinks. And that's what's happening in the gaming industry today. We've heard it before. This business model is unsustainable. We all have to make sacrifices so that the company can thrive. But why are companies put in the position of having to do cuts in the first place? Why are limitations so strict and expectations so high? Can you really expect somebody to run 10 miles with an iron ball attached to each foot? Who sets these limitations? Now this is the part where I usually introduce myself with some self-indulgent fanfare with my classic catchphrase
Elation and jubilation.
Elation and jubilation.
Elation and jubilation.
But there is very little to jubilate about today. Nonetheless, I am Lucian and this is the World Gamer Show. And today I want to let out my feelings about the depressive state of today's industry, and who should really be paying for the failures that led to this. Because I can tell you one thing straight away for free, it shouldn't be the developers. It's not the gaming studios that should pay the price for reckless corporate decisions.
Ever-increasing earnings and ever higher profitability.
By now, it's mostly common knowledge that stakeholders put the money, management manages the money and the employees do the actual work to generate more money than what was spent by creating good games that sell well. Everybody gets a piece of the cake, everybody should be happy, except when things don't go this way. And this is the model for most of today's private industries, not just gaming. If stakeholders are not happy because they didn't manage to generate enough money, then that's when some restructuring and source reallocations take place. It seems simple, but there is so many variables that can make things go south with very bad consequences, like people laid off, some headquarters closed down, or even complete bankruptcy in the most extreme cases. The more money is invested, the higher the stakes, obviously. And this is where things are specifically spiraling out of control in today's gaming industry. Gone are the times when video games were a niche hobby, just for the few selected nerds. With less people playing video games, there were less money involved, and companies were able to make more risks. Because if the game bombed, it wouldn't be such a big financial loss. Heck, the original Resident Evil 2 from 1998 was redone twice by Capcom. Resident Evil 4 was started over 4 freaking times. That's how much they were willing to risk it back in the day. That's not to say that there weren't any companies going bankrupt for bad decisions, of course. It's also a matter of how much of your capital you're willing to risk and on what. Now it's mostly all on the safest bet. Only the indie productions feel safe to experiment, because there is less money at stake. But the AAA gaming companies, they all put all their eggs on the one basket, which they think it's safe. And what happens when the bet you thought was safe fails to meet expectations? Or even fails completely? You lose money, and that's bad. But who decided to put all those eggs on that same basket? The developers? Nope, it's the management and the stakeholders. But who gets to pay for these wrong decisions? The management, The stakeholders by cutting their own salaries? Nope. It's the gaming studios, the actual developers, who had nothing to do with said decisions.
Oh, really? That sucks.
And guess what? These are real people, often with real families, real children, who in some cases can't afford to be sent away. Because nowadays, it's not easy to find a new job in the field, especially considering how easily the same corporate heads think the developers are easily replaceable by some AI algorithm. Was it all their fault that the game bombed? What was their fault? To follow orders, to suffer crunch, and then being unceremoniously sent away? To fall under a terrible leadership, that's their only fault in most cases. In too many cases. You, corporate asses, lead them terribly, take wrong decisions at every turn, and then developers are the ones to pay for it. It doesn't make any sense. And I do get it, we are all humans, we make mistakes, even the higher-ups make mistakes. We know. But take responsibility, for God's sake. That's what decent people do. And I don't mean by just releasing a statement telling, I'm sorry, we're sorry.
We're sorry, we're sorry, we're sorry, sorry.
No, take responsibility either by resigning or even better, cut your own salary to avoid layoffs. Don't cut your stuff. Why do developers need to pay for the reckless decision of some corporate idiots who are in complete disconnect from reality, who literally thought we desperately wanted something like this? Really, the most evident example is all the chasing of trends, such as Fortnite or the live service games, which indeed exploded in popularity over the last years, but the very definition of trend is that it can fade away once it reaches its peak. And it's nobody's fault. What is to blame is when you keep insisting on said dead trend because you think it's still alive and kicking, but instead it already passed its natural course, and then you act surprised when your game is not successful because of that. But no, instead you blame anything but your own lack of knowing how to read the market. And worse, you ultimately take it out on the developers. Microsoft is doing it. Sony did it as well. It's not news. But why aren't they steering towards a better direction? Don't they see that creativity is key in situations like this? They should reward creativity instead of punish it, basically. And I'm not being a dreamer or philosophical about it. Hi-Fi freaking Rush proved it. Stray proved it. These are very original games, and they were all surprise hits. What, these are not enough? Okay, let's go back. Today's gaming global phenomenon, Fortnite or Minecraft, came out of creative thinking. That's what made them so successful. If you beat on the same note, it's only normal that the audience will grow tired. And only those original games that started it all will keep on selling. After all, why should I go towards a pale imitation when I can go and play the real deal? Yes, Call of Duty sells. Yes, FIFA sells. Year after year, the same game, etc. It has become a meme at this point. But don't they see that these are the only ones in their category that sell? If you copy-paste it, it simply won't work. There is already a fan base there. That's when creativity comes into place. Or should come into place. Why don't these corporate idiots see this? That's what I mean by complete disconnect from reality. Also, the ever-increasing budgets and stakes are to blame. We are reaching the point where there are no mid-sized games anymore. Only AAA productions, which means we are waiting more, and there is also more pressure on each of these games to perform well. And guess what? Even when they do, often it's not enough and barely manage to recoup costs. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart was a success commercially, but it barely generated enough profits for Sony in spite of selling over 4 million copies.
Was that supposed to happen?
The solutions for these companies? To give us the same games over and over. And that's not even counting the remakes and remasters. This is wrong. That's not to say that there aren't good remakes, like the Resident Evil remakes, but these were successful because they brought enough new things to the table. In fact, where remakes were a little too close to the original, like The Last of Us Part 1 or even Dead Space, they either faced critical backlash or commercial failure. We don't need the same game over and over. We want new, fresh stuff. We want something we didn't see before, like the awesome Hi-Fi Rush. For God's sake, Microsoft has been trying to get a foot on Japan's store for years now, without any success. And of course, I realize that Japanese people often prefer to support companies from their own country, namely Sony and Nintendo. I get it, that goes for most countries really, I think. But Microsoft finally had a Japanese studio in Tango Gameworks, who clearly have been capable of producing a surprise hit. And what do? They shut it down. Straight after the surprise hit, for what? To incorporate those creative talents in more of the same live service bullshit. Why? Why do you keep acquiring studios if then you're not capable of keeping them alive? Why don't you just go talent scouting if you're after individuals, rather than shutting down everything in your path? EA is the same. Why don't you just leave the studios alone to find their own path, to find a company that can actually value them, rather than acquiring them only to closing them down straight after? Or because you released an unfinished product because of the limitations and crunch that you set for the studio. So it's ultimately your fault, not the studio. Well, Microsoft, I hope you're satisfied with the millions spent on the Activision Blizzard acquisition and the constant legal battles to pull it off. I know it eventually will pay back, but just know that you're building it on the ashes of talented studios and developers. But honestly, if this wasn't tragic, I would find it hilarious. First, Microsoft spends too much money on the acquisition of Activision, being the biggest deal in the history of gaming. And then, they realized only later that they couldn't really afford it without sacrificing other smaller studios at the altar of profit. I get that it's business, and maybe in some cases, some mistakes leading to layoffs were unavoidable or in good faith. But, then again, there is a good way and a bad way of conducting business. And layoffs, or rather there is an ethical way. You can be more transparent with your employees and even the customers. You can be more upfront, rather than saying something like, we want to give more freedom to the developers, and the other reassuring words like those. And then, well, you give them freedom alright, by sending them all home. No, God! You see, that's what really grinds my gears. It's not just the shutting down of studios. It's also the way it's been done. Both Sony and Microsoft's leaders had visited said studios only months prior, taking celebratory pictures with them. Closing down a studio is not something you decide on a whim. It takes months of planning, so it was virtually impossible that these so-called leaders didn't know that these studios would shortly be shut down.
My disappointment is immeasurable.
Why did Microsoft officially state that they wanted the Tango to have creative freedom and independence and only a few months later shut them down? Why do they state the freaking day after its closure that Microsoft needs more games like Hi-Fi Rush? Do these departments even communicate with each other? Do they realize how indelicate it all appears to the developers and their families? No? Possibly they don't even care. But then again, I tell you what they should care about. The public eye and their own credibility, that they destroy the gaffe after gaffe. Yeah, feel the burn alright. Man, no wonder Shinji Mikami, creator of Resident Evil, left Tango some months ago to form an indie studio. In fact, many lead developers left the big AAA scene because it's distressing, it's unsustainable even for the individuals. No wonder that veterans like him, or even Brett Toville, lead developer for Skyrim, Star Wars and Fallout 3 and 4, who I actually got to interview here on my channel, feel free to check the video out through the link in the description, they all went to form or work at more independent studios. They can't stand this bullshit either. These things have always happened in the industry, but now it's happening constantly. And I get it, there was the pandemic, there was the hardware component crisis, I get it, but you don't hear anything of the sort from Nintendo. On the contrary, I remember them actually increasing the salary, and the same with Capcom. Even freaking Konami did it.
What?
Yes, of course they are not perfect. Who is? Capcom filled the Dragon's Dogma 2 with every possible microtransaction, and even Nintendo. I remember the launch of the 3DS. It was a disaster. And what did Satoru Iwata do? Oh yeah, not only he cut his salary, but also admitted the mistake publicly and went back to actually fix the 3DS price and focused on bringing awesome games. Now that's honorable. We often hear now how Japanese developers can't keep up with Western ones. But to me, it seems we have more to learn from them when it comes to taking actual responsibility for your own mistakes. Even Sony did the same thing during the hack of 2011. Where is the cat on Phil Spencer's paisley? Even when these moronic leaders leave the companies, they get away with stellar paisley bonuses, like a certain Kotick from Activision. I'm just saying that if heads need to roll, the developers should be the last ones. So stop that, companies. Stop taking it out on the developers. Also because this behavior is going to bite you in the ass eventually. And this is already happening. Microsoft already lost a ton of credibility, as if they didn't in the months, heck, years prior. So why don't you just be smart and see the money that you are losing momentarily by keeping the studios open as an investment in trust, which you know, it's worth it. Trust both from the customer's point of view, but also from the developers, from the employees' point of view. I will never dream to go working for these companies nowadays. You are less than a number to them. While incompetent management, CEOs and stakeholders get their wallet fatter and fatter at the expenses of the employees who do the actual job and have families to feed. But yeah, it's also true that we played our part in this charade. It is us, the players, who keep on buying the same Call of Duty or the same FIFA or whatever it's called nowadays. Well, I don't. And I'm sure you who are watching this video also don't. But these sales numbers aren't as huge because nobody's buying them, you know. So what can we, the customers, do about it? These corporate people only understand money, so the only way to make them listen to us is by not giving them our money. So we can continue to support smaller sized titles and stop spending our salaries, allowances or what have you on always the same type of games. And I'm not referring to just the usual Call of Duty and FIFA. Ubisoft, and to a certain degree even Sony, are just as guilty when they propose as the same third-person open world or cinematic experience. Yes, many of them are awesome, but what I'm talking about is variety, is creativity. This feels so much like copy-pasted experiences that I'm not even interested in them anymore now. Let alone in the future if it's gonna be more of the same. I know I just said that. Even a surprise hit like Hi-Fi Rush didn't manage to save the studio. But that's because the mentality is still ill-based on Optus' judgment of the last years. Long story short, corporate leaders need to see the change on a constant basis. Oh, and by the way, the irony that Hi-Fi Rush is about fighting an evil corporation from the perspective of a supposedly defective person who needs to fight to stay alive is not lost on me, and I'm sure on you as well. But it is not enough that we buy Baldur's Gate 3, Hi-Fi Rush, Hades, etc. With today's mentality, they will always see these kind of games as a gamble. Call of Duty will always pay off in their mind, because that's the truth, at least for now. As long as these companies don't feel the need to innovate, they are comfortable in the billions of dollars we give them. First by buying the game full price, and then giving in to all the microtransactions. I don't, you don't, but somebody does. Actually, quite many somebodies. Again, money is what they listen to. And when they don't get what they consider to be enough, they cry like babies and take it out to the easiest target, the developers. This needs to stop. I don't want to be part of this. These talents need to be valued. These developers are the ones who bring us the game and put love and sweat and effort on their creations. And we know when they do, which is almost always because, again, nobody wants to make a bad video game. And developers, rest assured that when you make a game with love, we do see it. And we give love back. Just look at all the positive review bombing that Hi-Fi Rush received after the closure of Tango. The passion and dedication you feel has been put on when you play a game you love is not that of the idiotic CEOs and stakeholders, who are completely disconnected from reality. Now, I'm sure that there are stakeholders who are actually gamers and care about what they produce and help to create, but you know that the ones I talk about throughout the video are not them. And unfortunately, I feel that passionate CEOs and management and stakeholders are becoming more and more rare. Wanna know the cherry on top of this shitty cake? It's that oftentimes these corporate asses blame literally anybody but themselves for failures. A game that they were sure it will be successful actually bombed? Well, it must be because the audience is not interested in the brand anymore. It must be because the audience doesn't know what they want. It must be the developers who didn't work hard enough. Even though we crunched the shit out of them, it must be literally anything and anybody but ourselves. I can't stand this. I can't stand these leaders who don't take their responsibilities for failures that clearly are on them.
It's time to stop!
I sincerely hope that these talented developers who were unceremoniously deceived, used and thrown away will find a proper working place where to express themselves to the full potential. They deserve a break from all this shit. Let's do our part and support them. Let our voice be heard. Let them know that we know this is not okay. Let's spend our money in a smart way. Let's change the future. Let's steer it back on track, because this direction things are going is truly depressing. It really makes me want to crawl back to my shell of nostalgia, when there was enough room for creativity and experimentation, because these stakes weren't this high. There was so much more will to take a risk, even for big companies like Capcom and Konami. When there was space for mid-sized games, it's by experimenting that you develop the next big thing, not by relentlessly copying and flooding the market with lookalikes, or rather play-alikes. Think, CEOs, think! Stop being dumb, stop being blind, and most importantly, stop blaming the customers or the developers for your commercial failures. And rather be decent enough to blame yourself and take full responsibility for your own mistakes. And another thing, if you big gaming publishers buy indie studios because of their surprise hit, and then you put them under a ton of limitations, pressure, and crunch, don't be surprised if then they mysteriously don't manage to develop another hit like you wanted, because you didn't give them the tools to do so. And developers, indie companies, gaming studios, be sure of what you do. Protect yourself legally as much as you can when you accept working for these big companies. Please do it for yourselves. I don't want to see this kind of things happen to the next bunch of talented developers emerging from our difficult gaming industry. There are awesome games waiting to be developed. Do we really need to stay in everything this way? No, we don't need this crap. We need good games done by good working people in a good environment, with money for everybody to go around. Is it too much to ask? Am I really too naive? I think this can be achieved, but not if we keep quiet when this kind of shit happens. I won't stay quiet. And you? I'd like to apologize because I might have repeated myself here and there, but I really wanted to get my point across. Also, I'm sure that there must be a ton of small imperfections in my reasoning. I'm not a developer, I'm not an insider, so I really want to encourage you guys to share your opinion down in the comments. Let me know your thoughts in regards to this absurd and depressing situation. Do you think it's right for big companies to acquire studios left and right, only for them realizing that they bit more than they could chew and close them down? What could be done differently? Was it better back in the day, when the stakes weren't as high and there was more room for experimentation? Or all in all, it's better now thanks to the newer technology? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section down below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, do the magic and smash the like and subscribe buttons so that you're always up to speed with my latest content. But most importantly, I want to thank you so much for spending some of your precious time watching this video. I will be seeing you in my next one, but until then, stay safe, play safe, world gamers.